The first thing my sister did when she walked through those hospital doors wasn't hug me. It was ask for the visitor log. She had her wedding tan still on her shoulders and a carry-on bag rolling behind her like she'd come straight from the airport with a to-do list, and discharging me was item 3. The intake clerk at the front desk handed her the binder with the polite efficiency hospitals use when they've already decided not to argue. My sister flipped it open. She scrolled down the column of names with one manicured finger, and then her hand went still. I wasn't in the lobby. I was upstairs in room 412, sitting on the edge of my bed in a hospital gown, watching the door. My nurse Marcus had warned me she was coming. He'd said it the way people say weather's changing, not cruel, just factual. He also told me what she'd find in that binder. 8 names, 7 of them nurses and a chaplain, and one name that appeared every single night. Every single night. Starting the evening, my family flew to Charleston for my sister's wedding and not stopping until this morning. I didn't know who that name belonged to. Not yet. But my mother, I found out later, did. And that's where the real story starts. My name is Leah. I'm 29 years old, and I work in patient registration at a hospital in Phoenix, where the summers are aggressive and the waiting rooms are always full. People think registration is just paperwork. What it actually is triage for fear. Patients coming through our doors are already scared before they reach my window, and my job is to take the sharpest edges off the chaos, collect the insurance cards, confirm the allergies, find the next of kin. I'm good at it. I'm calm in situations that make other people's hands shake. I say I understand and we're going to take care of you, and I mean it every time. What I was less good at was saying any version of that to my own family. In our house growing up, my sister Cassie was the destination and I was the road. She was 2 years younger and 3 times more interesting, according to everyone who met us together. My mother called her the spark. My father called her our girl with this specific softness that his voice didn't carry for anyone else. I was called the responsible one, which sounds like a compliment until you understand it's a job description with no salary and no days off. I moved out at 22. My parents told me it was brave. What they meant was, you can still help from a distance. And I did. The asks started small, the way they always do. A car payment here, my father's dental work there. Then bigger, my mother's credit card that had gotten a little out of hand. The deposit on the venue for Cassie's engagement party because it was such a good rate, Leah, we can't pass it up. The rehearsal dinner, the florist, a chunk of the photographer because Cassie's fiancé's family simply could not contribute more right now. Over 3 years, I put in just under $60,000. I know the exact number because I'm someone who keeps records. Spreadsheets organized by date, category, and the excuse I was given. I built the spreadsheet at 2 a.m. during a shift where my feet were swollen and my lunch had been a granola bar. I looked at the total and felt something go hollow in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something more like exhaustion that had finally found its shape. I didn't say anything. That's the part that still sits wrong with me. I didn't say anything because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. My mother would cry. My father would go quiet in that deliberate way that meant I had disappointed him without him having to say so out loud. And Cassie would look at me with those confused, genuinely hurt eyes that had always made me feel like the villain for having a need of my own. So I kept the spreadsheet. I paid the florist. I worked the extra shifts. I told myself the wedding would be the end of it. That once Cassie was settled, the asks would stop. Then my appendix ruptured on a Tuesday night in March, and I stopped saying anything to anyone because I was unconscious. It happened fast, the way the body moves when it's done warning you. I'd had a dull ache for 2 days that I'd chalked up to stress. I was midway through an 8-hour shift, helping a 60-year-old man fill out his intake forms, when the pain crested so fast and so completely that I had to grip the desk. The man looked at me over his glasses. "Honey, you need to be on the other side of this window." He was right. I made it to the break room. I sat on the floor. Someone found me. The next thing I remember clearly is fluorescent ceiling tiles and the word peritonitis spoken above my head in the clipped, transactional tone that medical people use when they're talking about a situation rather than a person. Then an O. Then nothing. When I woke up, it was to the particular silence of a room where no one has been recently. Not just empty, settled, The kind of quiet that means a space has been vacated for long enough that it stopped expecting company. A half-full cup of water sat on the tray table. The television was off. Through the window, the sky was the deep gray of very early morning. I turned my head slowly, taking inventory the way you do when your body is recovering from something it wasn't consulted about. IV in my left arm. Drain tube. Compression socks. Bed raised to 30 degrees. And beside me, an empty chair with no jacket on the arm. No bag on the floor. No coffee cup on the side table. Just a chair. I lay there for a while. The monitors beeped at steady intervals, indifferent. A nurse came in eventually, checked my vitals, asked how my pain was on a scale of 1 to 10. I said 4. It was probably a 6. She introduced herself as Marcus and had the kind of unhurried gentleness that you earn, not train. My family? I asked. Marcus's hands slowed slightly on his clipboard. Just slightly. I've done intake long enough to know when someone is choosing words. They were here, he said. When you first came out of surgery, I waited. He looked at me. About 40 minutes. 40 minutes. I repeated it back to make sure I'd heard right. Marcus nodded carefully. He said it the way you say something true that you wish weren't. Your mother asked the attending about recovery timeline. Your father asked whether you'd need a home aid. Your sister, he paused. Your sister asked if she'd be able to fly out the next morning as planned. The next morning, I said. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. Where did they go? He glanced toward the window like the city might answer for him. Charleston, he said finally. South Carolina. Your sister's wedding is this Saturday. I closed my eyes. Of course it was. Cassie's wedding weekend, the weekend that had consumed 18 months of planning and approximately 40% of my savings, was 5 days away. I had been on the list. Maid of honor. Technically, though the title had always felt more administrative than ceremonial. I was supposed to give a speech. I had been carrying a folded note card in my work bag for 3 weeks. The speech never got given. I was in a hospital bed with a drain tube and a pain level I was understating to a man I'd just met. My phone was in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't reach for it that first day. I knew what I'd find: a few texts saying you'll be okay, and probably a photo of someone's rehearsal dinner table setting. I left it in the drawer and watched the window go from dark to pale gray to full phoenix morning, and told myself this was temporary, that it would make sense later, that there were reasons I just didn't know yet. The second night, Marcus was back for his shift. He came in to adjust my IV and stood at the side of my bed longer than the task required. I'd noticed he did that, gave people a little extra time without making it obvious that's what he was doing. It was a specific skill. Can I ask you something? I said. He nodded. Has anyone been here? Anyone other than the nurses? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, yes. I felt something shift in my chest. Who? He looked toward the door. There's a man, he said. He came last night. He asked for your room number at the nursing station. He didn't come in. He stood outside your door for a while and then sat in the chair in the hallway. I stared at the ceiling. What did he look like? Older, Marcus said. Maybe 60, 65. Neat. Like he'd put thought into being here. He brought coffee for the night staff. Didn't make a fuss about it. Just left it at the station. Who is he? Marcus shook his head. I don't know. He didn't give a name. I asked, and he said he'd rather wait. Like he wanted to ask you first, before he made any claims. I turned that over. Before he made any claims. That was an unusual way to put it. He came back tonight too? I asked. Marcus nodded. He's in the hallway now, actually. Has been for about 2 hours. Do you want me to send him in? I thought about it. No, I said. Not yet. Marcus nodded, like that was a reasonable answer. I lay awake after he left and tried to build a list. Friends who might come. A coworker, maybe. Someone from the building. I went through every name I could place, and none of them felt right. Nobody in my life was the type to sit in a hospital hallway for 2 hours in the middle of the night without announcing themselves. The people I knew best were efficient communicators. They would text first. The third night, I asked Marcus if the man had come again. He comes every night, Marcus said, without me asking. Like it was a point of information I should simply have. Every night? Every night so far. He's never come in? Marcus shook his head. He just sits. Last night he had a book. He reads in the chair outside your room, and at the end of visiting hours he leaves. I tried to imagine it. A stranger choosing a hospital corridor over wherever else he had to be. Reading in a plastic chair. Not asking for anything. I'd processed thousands of patients and their visitors over the years, and I knew what presence looked like. The kind that was about the visitor's need versus the kind that was about the patient's. This sounded like the second kind. Does he know I know? I asked. Marcus smiled slightly. I haven't said anything. There's something else, Marcus said after a pause. He spoke with hospital billing yesterday morning. I only know because one of the billing staff mentioned it. She said a man came in, paid a balance, and asked for the receipt to be left for you. Anonymous, she said. But she described him the same way I just did. My brain went quiet in a specific way. He paid my bill? Marcus said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. My family had not called the billing department. My family was at a rooftop reception in Charleston, eating past hors d'oeuvres and taking photos in good lighting. And a man whose name I didn't know, who sat outside my door reading a paperback book every night and asked for nothing, had walked into the billing office and settled my account. When you've spent years being treated like a resource, you recognize the shape of generosity by how foreign it feels. On the 5th night, I finally saw him. I'd gotten to the point where I could walk to the door with help. I stood at the threshold of my room and looked down the corridor. He was in the chair at the end of the hall, mid-60s, silver-haired, wearing a gray jacket like he'd dressed with intention. He had a book open in his lap, but he wasn't reading. He was looking at the floor with an expression I recognized from a lot of intakes. The face of someone who has been waiting so long that waiting has become the whole point. I lifted my hand. Just slightly, because raising it higher than my shoulder hurt. He looked up. Saw me, and something moved across his face that I couldn't name. Not relief exactly. More like the moment before relief. The second when you realize the thing you've been afraid to hope for might actually be happening. He stood up slowly. He didn't come closer. He just stood and nodded. A single, quiet nod. Then he sat back down. I went back to bed. I lay there and looked at the ceiling and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, which was the specific texture of being seen by someone who wasn't keeping score. The next morning, I asked Marcus for his name. Marcus looked at me for a moment, the way he did when he was making a decision about something. Then he said, Robert Hale. The name didn't hit me like a sound. It hit me like a pressure change. Like the room had shifted slightly on its axis. I knew that name. Not from my own memory. I was too young for that. I knew it the way you know a forbidden word. Something said once in a low voice and then never again. Something that, when I was 12 and had asked my mother about it after finding an old photograph, made her face close like a door shutting. That's nobody. She'd said. Nobody. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. On day 7, he finally walked through the door. He stood near the entrance the way someone stands when they're not sure of their welcome. His hands were in his jacket pockets, and his expression was careful in the way of someone who has practiced this moment many times and knows none of the practice was adequate. I heard you've been outside every night, I said. He nodded once. I didn't want you to be here alone, I said. You paid my hospital bill, he said. Yes, I said. Why? He looked at his hands for a moment. Then back at me. He said, because someone should have been here, and they weren't. And this was the one thing I could do from the hallway. I studied his face. He had the kind of stillness that isn't emptiness, it's the result of having moved through a lot of hard things and come out the other side quieter. He looked like a person who had been sitting with something for a very long time. I know your name, I said. He didn't look surprised. I thought you might. Who are you to me? I asked. I kept my voice even. Dispatcher calm, hospital registration calm. The voice I used when someone needed information more than comfort. He met my eyes. He said, I was your father's closest friend for 31 years. He passed away 6 weeks ago, and 3 days ago, I got a call from his attorney about a document your father had left with instructions about you. My chest went tight. What kind of document? He reached into his jacket and brought out an envelope. He placed it on the tray table beside me without pushing it toward me, without making me take it. He just set it down like it was mine to reach for or not. Your father had a will, he said. You're in it. He'd been trying to find a way to reach you for years. Your mother made that difficult. I looked at the envelope. I looked at him. The photograph, I said. The one my mother took away. His jaw moved slightly. He said, Your father never stopped asking about you. The room was very quiet. I asked him to tell me everything. He did. It took an hour and covered things that rearranged my understanding of my own history in ways I wasn't ready for and received anyway. My mother had ended the relationship before I was born and had married my stepfather 8 months later. My biological father had tried to establish contact multiple times. He'd sent letters. My mother had never given them to me. He'd tried to appear in person when I was 7, and she had threatened a restraining order. He had respected it. He had spent the rest of his life believing I'd been told he existed and had chosen not to respond. Robert had been beside him for all of it. I kept waiting for this to feel like too much. Instead, it felt like the opposite. Like pressure releasing from something that had been held closed for a very long time. My sister called on the evening of day 8. She was back from the honeymoon, and she had the specific energy of someone who had been on vacation long enough to become mildly irritated by reality. She said, I'm coming to get you tomorrow. We need to get you home and settled so we can figure out the copay and the recovery plan. I said, I'm not being discharged tomorrow. She said, Leah, it's been over a week. I said, I know. I was here. A pause. She said, a little quieter. I know you're upset. I'm not upset, I said. I'm clear. Another pause. The kind that means someone is deciding whether to push. She said, Mom says you've been talking to some man who came to the hospital. That we don't know who he is. I said, I know who he is. Leah, her voice tightened. I said, his name is Robert Hale. He came every night. He's been here more than you have. She went quiet in a different way. A sharper way. She said, carefully. What did he tell you? Everything Mom didn't, I said. The line was silent for a long moment. Then my sister said, in the soft voice she used when she was trying to reset a conversation, don't make any decisions while you're still in there. You've been through something hard, and you're not thinking straight. I looked at Robert's envelope on the tray table. I said, I've been thinking straighter in this room than I have in 3 years. My mother arrived the next morning with my sister in tow. My mother had a tote bag of things she'd brought for me, dry shampoo, a novel, 2 magazines, and the particular warmth of someone who has decided in advance that everything is fine now. She kissed my forehead. She said, there she is, like I'd been on a mild adventure. She smelled like her usual perfume and also slightly like sunscreen that hadn't fully faded. My sister stood near the door, with her arms crossed, and her eyes moving around the room like she was taking inventory. Robert was sitting in the chair in the corner of my room. He'd been there since 7. My mother didn't register him at first. Then she turned and saw him, and the tote bag went still in her hands. Her face did something complicated, something that went through several states in quick succession surprise. Then something sharper. Then something I could only describe as the expression of someone watching a wall they built come down. What is he doing here? She said. It wasn't quite a question, I said. He's been here every night, Mom. She turned to me. Her voice was very controlled. Leah, you don't know who this person is. I do, I said. He told me. She set the tote bag down on the counter. Her mouth thinned. Whatever he told you, it's not the whole story. He doesn't have any claim here. This is family business. Robert said nothing. He had told me he wouldn't push in unless I asked him to. He was keeping his word. My sister stepped closer. She said, lower. Mom, we should talk about this outside. No, I said. They both looked at me. We're talking about it here, I said. In this room. My mother straightened. She said, Leah, you have been through something very traumatic, and you are being manipulated by a stranger. I said, he's not a stranger. And I'm not the one who's been running from this conversation for 29 years. Her eyes flashed. I gave you a good life, I said. You gave me a role. There's a difference. My mother's jaw set. We can discuss all of this at home. That's where we should be having this conversation. I said, I changed my emergency contact while I was here. Silence, I said. I removed both of you from my medical decisions. The forms are already filed with the administrator. My sister's arms uncrossed. She said, "You can't just... It's already done," I said. "I'm an adult patient. I had the right." My mother took one step toward me. Her voice dropped to the precise register it used when she was trying to make something feel intimate and urgent at the same time. "Think about what you're doing," she said. "Think about what we've been through as a family. Your father's health, the bills, everything we sacrificed." I opened the notes app on my phone. I turned the screen toward her. $61,430, I said. "That's what I have records for? 3 years?" She blinked at the screen. I said, "I want you to know that number. I want you to be able to say out loud that you know it." She didn't say it. My sister said carefully, "We needed help. That's what family does." I said, "Family also comes to the hospital." Cassie flinched. She said, "There were circumstances. The wedding." I said, "I know. I know exactly what the circumstances were. I've had 9 days to think about nothing else." My mother tried one more time. Her voice went softer. She said, "Whatever this man told you, whatever he's promised you, you need to think about loyalty. You need to think about who your real family is." I looked at her for a moment. Then I looked at Robert, sitting quietly in his chair, who had driven to this hospital every night and sat outside my door with a paperback book and asked for nothing. I looked back at my mother. I said, "You're right. I do need to think about who my real family is." My mother's face cycled through a few more things. She picked up the tote bag. She looked at me like she was waiting for me to take it back, to soften, to give her the reaction she was used to getting from me, the one where I absorbed the weight of everyone else's discomfort and called it love. I didn't give it to her. I held her gaze and let the quiet sit between us. She walked out. Her heels on the floor were sharp and deliberate. My sister stood at the door for a moment. She looked like she wanted to say something that would fix it. Some sentence that would put everything back in the shape it had been in. She couldn't find it. She left. The door settled closed. The room was very still. Marcus came in a few minutes later to check my vitals. He looked at the empty doorway, and then at me. He said, professionally neutral, "You doing okay?" I said, "I feel like I can't breathe." He nodded. "That's what the end of something feels like sometimes." He checked my blood pressure and wrote it down and left me to sit with it. Robert stayed. He didn't speak for a long time. He just sat in the chair in the corner and let the room be whatever it needed to be. After a while, he asked if I wanted him to get me anything from the cafeteria. I said coffee. He came back with 2 cups and set mine on the tray table and sat back down with his. We drank coffee in the quiet of a hospital room in Phoenix while the city went about its Tuesday outside the window. I got discharged on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus helped me sign the last of the paperwork. He walked me out to the elevator with the air of someone completing a shift with all its tasks fulfilled. At the elevator, he paused. He said, "You're the steadiest person I've seen come through a hard week in a long time." I said, "I cried in the bathroom twice." He said, "That's still steady." Robert drove me home. He hadn't pushed about any of it, the will, the money, the questions I hadn't asked yet. He'd told me what I needed to know and then given me space to do whatever I was going to do with it. On the ride home, I looked out the window at Phoenix in the afternoon, all flat light and wide roads and palm trees that always looked slightly too deliberate, and I thought about the photograph my mother had taken away. I'd been 12. The man in it had had silver hair starting at his temples, and he'd been standing on a beach somewhere, laughing at something outside the frame. I had his exact same laugh. I'd always thought it was mine alone. When Robert pulled up to my building, he put the car in park and sat for a moment. He said, "There's no timeline for any of it. You take whatever time you need." I said, "He knew who I was?" "Yes," Robert said. "He knew everything about you. He just never got to tell you himself." I looked at my building. I thought about going upstairs and opening my laptop and opening the spreadsheet. I thought about canceling the autopay I had set up for my mother's credit card, the one I'd established 18 months ago with the plan to revisit it when things settled down. Things had settled into a new shape, but settled. I took out my phone and did it right there in the car. The autopay? The shared bank access I'd added during a moment of family closeness 3 years ago that had never been removed. The beneficiary on an old savings account. One by one, the things I'd handed over to people who didn't show up. Robert said nothing. He watched the windshield. When I was done, I put the phone away. I sat in the quiet for a moment. I said, "Do you want to come up? I can make real coffee. Better than the hospital stuff." He smiled. He said, "I'd like that." We went upstairs. I made coffee in my kitchen while the afternoon turned gold outside the window. Robert sat at my table and told me about my father, not the history, not the complexity, but the texture of him. The way he apparently kept a notebook of things he wanted to say to me. The trips he'd taken, some of them near Phoenix, that Robert now admitted had not been entirely accidental in their geography. The way he'd asked about me at the end, whether I was well. I stood at my kitchen counter and cried for the first time that wasn't in a hospital bathroom. Not soft crying, the kind that comes from a place that has been sealed for so long that the opening of it is almost violent. Robert didn't try to stop it or manage it. He sat at my table and waited. Later, when we were on the second cup, I asked him, "What do I do with all of it?" He thought about it seriously. He said, "You don't have to do anything with it yet. You just have to carry it for a while until it tells you what shape it wants to be." I looked at my apartment, my kitchen, my coffee maker, the window with the view of the parking lot that I'd always meant to do something about, a plant maybe, or a better curtain. Small intentions that had kept getting pushed back by other people's larger needs. My mother texted twice that evening. I read the texts. I didn't answer. My sister texted once, "Call me when you're ready." I held my phone and thought about what ready meant and decided it was the wrong word. It wasn't about readiness. It was about deciding what I was willing to keep carrying and what I was finally going to put down. I put the phone face down on the counter. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning when the Phoenix heat hadn't fully committed to the day yet, I drove to the desert edge of the city where there's a trail I'd been meaning to walk for 2 years and kept not walking. I parked. I put on my shoes. I started at the trailhead and went slowly because my body was still figuring out what it was rebuilt from. The desert in early morning sounds like almost nothing. Just wind and the occasional bird and the specific silence of something very old that has no interest in your timeline. I walked for about a mile, and then I sat on a flat rock and looked at the skyline of the city I'd been paying to hold up for 3 years while it barely looked back. My phone had a voicemail from my mother I hadn't listened to. I looked at the notification for a moment. Then I opened the voicemail app and deleted it without playing it. Not in anger, in the same way you remove something from a room when you're rearranging it, not because it was terrible, but because it doesn't belong in the space you're building. I sat on the rock for a long time. Robert had said something to me, in my kitchen, on that first afternoon. He'd said, "You spent your whole life waiting for them to see you, and they were always going to see what they needed. That's not something you could have fixed." I had turned that over many times since. It was the kind of sentence that gets more specific the longer you look at it. The city sat where it always sat, flat and bright and going about its business. I had a job I was returning to on Monday. I had a will to read and a history to absorb on whatever timeline it decided to take. I had a father I hadn't known, and a man who had driven to a hospital every single night to sit outside a glass door, asking for nothing, offering everything that was his to offer. I had, for the first time in a long time, a version of my life that I had not handed to someone else to manage. The sun came up properly over the ridge. I felt it on my face and let it sit there. Someone had told me once, I think it was Marcus, that last morning in the hallway, that healing isn't the same as going back, that sometimes you come out of something and the life you return to doesn't quite fit anymore, and that's not a failure. That's the healing working correctly. I thought about that on the rock, in the desert, while the city turned gold behind me. I thought, maybe the people who show up quietly, who ask for nothing, who sit in hallways because they can't bring themselves to leave, maybe they're not rare. Maybe I just stopped looking in the right direction. I stood up. I brushed the dust off my jeans. I walked back toward the trailhead, slowly, on legs that were still learning what it meant to carry only their own weight. It was enough. For the first time in years, it was exactly enough.